Many years ago, like 15 years ago, at the end of 2008, Paul Krugman, the economist, came to CBS and on his way to Stockholm. And he stopped by and held a talk that I was lucky enough to get free tickets for because I work at CBS. That's one of the perks of being part of this research university. And one of the things that I was struck by when Krugman was speaking was that after a short introduction where a sort of, remember this was in 2008, so there was a crisis going on. He was introduced in a series of talks about the crises that we're facing. And of course, his task was to speak about the financial crisis, which was going on at the time. And he came up to the front of the room after being introduced with this very, very elaborate PowerPoint presentation going through all these crises and pulled out a piece of yellow, like foolscap paper out of his pocket, unfolded it, looked like something maybe he jotted down on the plane on the way over, put it down on the table in front of him. And then he kind of sort of held forth for, I don't know, an hour, maybe a little longer than that, about the causes of the financial crisis, why he thought it happened, where he thought it was, what it came from, where he thought it was going. Then there was a break, and then he took questions for about 3/4 an hour, people asking questions. He had that way of listening to a question, and then he would repeat the question in phrasing that showed that he understood it, right? And then he would answer it in some intelligent way. And you just got the real feeling that you were in the presence of somebody who had his mind all the way around the subject that he was talking about, right? That he really understood, he knew what he was talking about. He knew that what he was talking about. And so he was just saying the things he believed. Of course, he was on his way to Stockholm to pick up the Nobel Prize in economics, right? So I'm ambitious. I too have a piece of paper that I'm now going to unfold and hold forth for about an hour. Do you see what I did there? So we're already starting a talk on how to talk with some tricks of the trade. One thing you can do when you're starting a talk is not to introduce yourself. Just say a quick welcome and then just tell a story. Now, it has to be a pretty quick story because people are thinking, what's going on? He's just starting, he isn't even saying who he is. So you have to tell a quick story, an anecdote with an obvious point. And if it sets up a little prop you've prepared from home as well, that is also perfectly legit. There's, of course, alternative ways of doing it. You can start a talk by stating an interesting fact. You can start a talk by asking an interesting question, or like I say, you can tell a little story like that. You can also do what I've been doing for most of this series, is to say, hello, my name is Thomas Bespel. I'm the resident writing consultant at the CBS Library. And what I'm actually telling you is some really, really, really standard tricks of the trade of just holding a talk. And that last option is the one that's usually not recommended, the one where you introduce yourself to an audience that is there to hear you talk about exactly the thing you're going to say, and they know who you are, and you're telling them things that it says right on the poster, right? All of the things that I've just said, you can actually find on a video, YouTube video, not by me, a very, very good rhetorician who presents this kind of speaking advice. And one of the things that he suggests, and I don't mention his name because I don't want to embarrass him. He's really good at what he does. One of the things he suggests is that you should start with what he calls a factoid. And the example he uses is more people are alive today than have ever died. That's his example. Now, if you Google that factoid, you will find out that it is false. So, quick word to the wise. If you're going to start your talk with an interesting little fact, make sure it's true, or at least not the sort of thing that if somebody says, really, and then Googles it, the first article they get is why this myth is wrong, right? So there's little details there. Some of these tricks seem like things, okay, I'll tell a story, or I'll come up with a little fact, or I'll ask a question. Just make sure you've tested it. If there are easy things that an audience does as soon as you start doing these things, and you just want to make sure you've tested the audience response to that, right? What am I going to do today? I'm going to talk to you about how to talk, because the art of talking, the art of speaking effectively, is part of the art of learning. And of course, this is the Art of Learning series that you've decided to attend today. One little trick when you're planning a talk of any kind, of any length, including an hour-long thing like this, or even a 10-minute talk, or even a 5-minute pitch, is just to recognize the finitude of the problem. Right? Recognize that your talk is going to start at a particular time, and know when it's going to finish, and understand how much time you have so that you make a plan for what you're going to accomplish in that time. And I've actually done that very explicitly throughout all of these talks that we've been doing. So you'll immediately recognize the structuring metaphor for our talks. It is, of course, an iceberg. And what I've done, and what I especially did in the first talk, which was called How to Know Things, and I can tell you that we'll get back to that talk at the end, not next talk, but the talk after that, where we'll talk about how to know things again, both as a kind of repeat of that lecture, but also as a way of reminding ourselves that what we learn at school is something we want to be able to retain as we go forward. And we want to make sure we have that skill of learning that we're taking with us, right? But what I did in the first talk is I said, look, knowledge, the output of learning, is something you're going to have under the surface, and it's going to be related to a performance. So you're going to have to think better than most people about the stuff that you are studying. You're going to have to write better than most people about the things you're studying. That's your competence, right? You're getting an education, so you will be a better thinker and a better writer about these subjects. We've had talks about that. Today, we're going to talk about the competence of talking, which is another way you demonstrate that you are good at what you do, that you have become a knowledgeable person while at university. And then I said, under the surface of that, deep, deep, deep under the surface, right, there is a capacity to feel. And we'll talk about that next week if you wish to attend. I have not called it How to Feel, but I have called the talk How to Enjoy Things, right? How to find pleasure in the art of learning. That's an important competence to have. Being good at something, I like to say, is also the ability to enjoy it, right? To see the joy in it. Underneath your ability to talk, we had a talk, I'm trying to remember now, last time, about listening effectively, right? So underneath the ability to talk, the competence that I would like to both talk about today and hopefully demonstrate if I can, there is this ability to listen. That's really what informs your capacity to talk. And of course, under your ability to write, there is the ability to read. And we've also had a talk about that today, or sorry, in this series. Then I did something, and this is where it gets interesting as far as planning a talk of your own goes. When I did the How to Talk talk, the How to Know Things talk, I said, let's divide up this space in here into some orderly sections like this, 15 of them. And then I said, I'm going to spend about 3/4 of an hour going through them. So 15 spots, 3/4 of an hour, about 3 minutes per insight, right? That prepares you as an audience. We're going to get through some things today, right? But it also prepares me as a speaker, because I know I have to be moving forward. I also know when I should just drop it if I feel like I'm fumbling, and just move on to the next thing so I can hit the beat, right? Sometimes you don't want to just get stuck and think you have to get out of this. You just have to trust in your plan and move forward through it, right? So that's a really important thing to do. Otherwise, the audience does start to worry that you're getting yourself lost, right? So don't do that. I then did something which is also very useful, which is to say we're going to move through different areas of competence, right? We're going to do a little bit of philosophy. We're going to do some rhetoric. That's what we're going to do today. We'll talk about rhetoric. And we're going to do some literature, some literacy, right? The ability to write. So we've got some philosophy, some rhetoric, and some literacy to talk about. And then I went through it, and I'm not going to go through it very quickly today, but I spent about 3 minutes on each of these. I said, philosophers will tell you that being able to think knowledgeably is being able to make up your mind, which is to say being able to form justified true beliefs, right? So you form a belief, it should be true, and you should have a good reason to believe it, right? And that's in the How to Think lecture, where I go through that. We'll skip this for a second, because we'll get back to it today, right? Over on the How to Write area, I talked about you're going to write at least 6 sentences, at most 200 words. You will support, when I did that, I won't do it here, different colors. You will support, elaborate, or defend, all according to whether or not your reader has a hard time believing, understanding, or agreeing, right? So that was sort of the structure, the plan of the How to Write talk was being knowledgeable at university is the ability to write a coherent prose paragraph of at least 6 sentences and at most 200 words that says one thing and supports, elaborates, or defends it, depending on whether or not your reader has a hard time believing, understanding, or agreeing with you, right? We walked through that, elaborated through that a little bit. Then I said the kicker, and this is the one that you also want to take with you today, is understand that there is a time limit to everything you do. And if you want to have the competence of writing effectively, don't say, give me an unlimited amount of time and I can write a good paper. Make sure you say to yourself, if I know something, I can compose a coherent prose paragraph about it in 27 minutes. Right? So that was the point there. If you think 27 minutes is a little bit extreme, right, then 18 minutes is fine as well. 18-minute paragraphs are perfectly fine. Think about that in terms of time as well, right? You're not a good talker, in terms of speech as well. You're not a good talker if you need unlimited amounts of time to demonstrate your knowledge, right? You need to, part of the competence is saying, okay, give me 10 minutes, I know what to say in those 10 minutes, right? Give me 30 minutes, I know what to do with that. Give me 2 hours, different situation, I know what to do with that as well. Right? But keep that in mind that you're training that in everything else you do. And then one of the things that I really emphasized in the in every session, but certainly also in the How to Know Things session, is that we all have different senses of our strengths and weaknesses with relation to these performances, right? So some of us feel very strong as thinkers and writers, but not very strong in the situation that I'm in right now as speakers in front of an audience, right? And we would like to be. It's going to be useful to us later on in life. So we'd like to build that competence. Maybe that's why we decided to attend this talk, right? Remember, as you practice it, as you go into developing this skill, to just take stock of, I'm a good thinker, I'm good at forming justified true beliefs. I'm a good writer, I'm good at writing coherent prose paragraphs, right? I'm going to draw on that strength. I'm going to speak from that position of strength when I speak. I'm not going to remind myself that this is something I find very hard and it makes me very nervous. I'm going to remind myself that using my knowledge in other ways for thinking and writing, I feel very strong, and I'm going to step into the room. I'm going to step into the situation in that same position of strength, right? Because then I can start practicing. and give myself tasks that I can perform, and where knowing what I'm talking about is not the problem. It's finding the right words, saying them in the right cadence, and so forth, right? Planning out my talk. So remember that, find your confidence first. Wherever your strength is, find it, and then bring it to the game. That's what you want to do. All right, so today we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about those points. But by way of sort of introduction, did you notice I said Paul Krugman, right? And I had to just, every time I talk about this, I have to look it up. What is the actual pronunciation of Paul Krugman's name? It's not Krugman, right? Although some people do pronounce it Krugman. And as I'm told that the standard pronunciation is Krugman, right? But if you ask Paul Krugman himself, he'll say it's more like the oo sound is more like as in book. So it's like Krugman. So it's kind of halfway in between those two, right? But most of the people that introduce them will say Krugman. So just keep in mind that names have pronunciations, and learning them so that when you're using them in a talk is quite useful to you. And it's an easy thing to do these days because Google is your friend. You just type, how do I pronounce? And a nice little YouTube video will come up with real world examples of people saying that name or saying that word for you. So you can learn it. Another great question is learning how to spell these particular words and names that you're going to be saying, right? That's a good, my favorite example of this is an undergraduate. I'm just writing a blog post about this now. I had been going to lectures with my philosophy teacher, and I was very, I was trying to be smart and trying to learn all the big words. And I thought he said conscrew, not construe. So when I first learned the word construe, as in construct an idea, construe something in your imagination, I thought he said conscrew. And so I just, when I was talking to friends and stuff, just out at the pub, I would say, you're conscrewing this all wrong. If I just read the word, I would have known much better. So look up words, learn how to pronounce them. This will help you. Small details. I'm not trying to make you anxious about it. What I'm trying to say is happens to everybody, right? And there are ways out of it. And of course, learn what the words mean. And like I say, if you are going to mention interesting little facts, and you can have like a list of them that you use in your talking, make sure that they're solid ones. Right? Make sure the ones that you actually know are true, and aren't the ones that get debunked the instant somebody gets curious about them. Right? That's a very strong position to talk from. Plan your speak, especially if you're deliberately trying to get better at speaking. Plan when you're going to start and when you're going to stop, how long of an interaction this is. And remember that goes for both holding a talk, delivering some sort of pitch or intervention in a meeting, any place where you're going to give a presentation, but it also goes for conversations. If you are deliberately having a conversation to become a better speaker, to become a better talker, agree with the people that you're talking to when it's going to start and when it's going to stop. Everybody pays much better attention, brings a much better game to the conversation if they know when it's going to start and when it's going to stop. And then we're focused during the time, then we can relax afterwards, right? Keep that in mind. All of those little disciplining things are quite useful. All right, so let's get into it. Like I say, probably we're going to go for another at least half an hour, maybe 40 minutes. Then we'll take a break as usual, and I'll answer any questions you have. If there's some reason that you think this is a good time to ask a question, I'm going to jump right in. Please do, and we'll see if I can handle it. If I can't, we'll just punt it to the question, to the Q&A, right? But definitely don't hold back if you have something that you want me to deal with right away. All right, so what is this competence that we have under the surface that we perform in talking. A good way of defining this is, please don't tell yourself while you're at university that you are a very knowledgeable person because you have lots of justified true beliefs and you're a really good writer, but you just can't talk. Don't say, I know, I just can't explain, right? Being able to explain is part of knowing. So start there. The competence we can define as follows. Being knowledgeable at university is the ability to hold your own in a conversation with other knowledgeable people, right? So find some other knowledgeable people and learn how to converse with them. That is the basic skill that you want. And that also means that if you're standing in front of a room full of knowledgeable people, you're also addressing them in that manner as other intelligent, educated, knowledgeable people. That's the competence you want. And then we can talk a little bit about what the components of that competence is. And of course, some of you have heard parts of this before because I've given the little pocket versions of it, right? You've all heard there's no such thing as a stupid question, and you've all experienced that it's a lie. There are stupid questions. And you've heard other people ask them, and you've every once in a while found yourself asking a question that was less informed than it could have been if you'd prepared properly for class. Right? Everybody does it. Happens to the best of us. But it does show that part of a competence, a conversational competence, right? If you are conversant in your subject matter, then you can recognize a good question. You can articulate a good question yourself. Right? You can recognize when somebody else asks it, and you can treat it accordingly. There are different levels of this. Some of them are just little conversational moves you make. Some of them are like, what's a good question to ask at the beginning of a talk? Some of them are, what's a good question to arrive at, as though the whole talk is trying to raise this issue? Right? What becomes a good question once I tell you everything I know about the subject? You will all be working at some point on research projects, and you will have to formulate a research question, which has that wonderful feeling of what is everything we know on the subject at this level of the program? What's still a good question to do some research about? Like, what would still be a valid investment of time to study deliberately and learn more about? So there are these really big, good questions that sort of indicate everything we know and the things that we still need to learn. And then there are these little good questions like, what does it say in this book? Or who said this when? What are the facts of the matter? Right? Little questions like that, some of which are good, some of which really just show you might not be in the right conversation, right? That you're not knowledgeable about the subject. Right? So learn that difference. But remember also that this is rhetorical competence. It's a skill. It's eloquence. It's all about keeping the conversation going. So we don't want to be the person that says that's a stupid question, right? We don't want to be the person that recognizes a bad question, calls it stupid, and ends the conversation, right? That's not who we want to be. That's not skill. Skill is recognize a stupid question, say, interesting, and then move the conversation, right? Slowly, effectively away from it, onto more fertile ground, right? And then have the conversation there. And if you can do that without the person who asked the question even noticing it, then you've got some real skill, right? So what you've done is you've kept the conversation going. You've avoided 10 minutes of wasted time just dealing with that, right? And you have facilitated a nice experience for the other members of the conversation. Or in the case of an audience Q&A, you have spared everybody the embarrassment of that, right? And you've made good use of the time instead. That's skill. The more knowledgeable you are, the more skillful you are as a speaker, the easier that is. So keep that in mind. There are good and bad questions. It's part of your ability to converse. The other thing that you have in a conversation is, especially among knowledgeable people, is a shared sense of humor. There are things that are funny to say among people who know things that are not funny for people who don't know the same things. And there are a whole series of well-known witticisms that will come up in your discipline. So I've made a little list of these. So have you heard this one? I think this is one that's usually attributed to Churchill, like democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. Except for the alternatives, democracy is the worst form of government, kind of thing. Capitalism is the system by which man exploits man. Communism is the other way around. Right? Jokes like that. This is probably my favorite one. You've probably heard this one as well. History is just one damn thing after another. Those kinds of things. These are obviously just banalities in many ways, right? They have a little bit of humor to them, but they are only humorous in environments where they indicate knowledge. Like they're not little jokes. They're not one-liners, punchlines in that sense. They have a sort of depth to them, a kind of wit to them. And you'll notice these in all of your in your courses. They come up every once in a while. And at the beginning, you'll find them very funny and you'll use them, right? And at some point, you'll also realize, oh, this is where one says this kind of thing or could say this kind of thing, but it's only going to reveal that I'm kind of a novice. I'm new to the field if I use it, right? So you start getting a sense of this sort of sophisticated sense of humor that there is in every field and every discipline. Remember your students. So you're allowed, first of all, you're allowed to have fun, right? And secondly, you're developing this. So you're trying things out. You're going to see if they work or not. You're going to see if they actually make people chuckle or not. Right? I don't have a really advanced theory of humor or academic humor, but there is an interesting thing to think about when you think about all kinds of humor. And that is that it plays on our sense of the absurd. Right? So things are funny if you say something that's kind of absurd, right? Sort of nonsensical, meaningless. But of course, what is and is not absurd depends on what we know. There's a sort of abyss to the absurd that we kind of indicate or reach up to. And so the more we learn, the more we know, and the more we're familiar with what the other people in the conversation know, the more we can play on that edge, right? The edge of the unknown, right? And that lets us be funny or not. So keep that in mind, that the more you know, some things will be funny and some things will stop being funny. And that is something I do stress. You start being able to get jokes you wouldn't otherwise get. You also stop finding things funny that you once found funny. Right? So you learn too much about finance or law or accounting, and then there's a lot of finance, law, or accounting jokes that no longer seem funny to you because you simply know too much. Right? That's fine. That's fine. Let it happen. And remember that when you're among Wall Street bankers right, or accountants or lawyers, certain kinds of jokes no longer are appropriate. Because they're fine for the masses. Right? We can accept other people's humor, but we just no longer find them funny ourselves. Right? Make sense so far? I do want to stress that just because you have a sense of humor and just because it's part of your speaking competence does not mean that your goal in having a conversation with other knowledgeable people is to make them laugh all the time. And certainly in all the other things you're doing and writing and so forth, you're not just writing things that are fun or funny as you go. What you are doing, though, sometimes is displaying your sense of humor by laying out all the things that give you an occasion to tell a joke, but then not telling it. Right? You could actually describe an event as one damn thing after another without making that joke that history is one damn thing after another. right? So you could grab a hold of the humor in that without telling the joke, right? Without presenting the punchline. All of that's good for your style. It's a great thing to be aware of, that there are things that make people laugh, and it does, of course, lubricate the conversation, as we say, right? It keeps things going nicely. And that brings us to the next thing. Always the most interesting part of my talk, getting more and more interesting as we go, I should say. These days, we are all aware of the fact that in any community of like-minded people, so other knowledgeable people, there are going to be things that it is not okay to say. Right? Things that will put you it's not just going to ruin the mood, right? It's not just going to make you look ignorant, right, as a stupid question might. So we're not sensitive just to this idea that we will intellectually embarrass ourselves, but that will somehow morally grate on our audience. So the audience will find us morally abhorrent if we say certain things, right? And I say that in the strongest possible terms, even though it can just be a little bit of irritation sometimes, just a little bit of annoyance. This is something that was pointed out many, many years ago in Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which came out in 1962, but especially in his 1970 postscript to that book. He pointed out that a scientific community is founded in part on a shared sense of values. There's a really good example that I heard or was reminded of recently by a historian here at CBS, Henrik Lando, who pointed out that this is like back in the 70s and 80s, Richard Posner, who is a sitting judge currently in the United States, but also a very, very well-recognized legal theorist, expert, who did a great deal to apply economic reasoning to law. So he would think law and economics. So if you're interested in law and economics, Richard Posner is definitely a name you will run into. He had been considered for the Supreme Court, and I think expert opinion now is he will never sit on the Supreme Court of the United States because of this thing that I'm going to tell you about now. He had the brilliant idea that one way to solve the problem of getting the right babies adopted into the right families would be, as an economist, he was thinking, we could do this with economics. We'll have a market. We'll sell the babies, right? And then, of course, using their socioeconomic background and so forth, babies will have different values. So we will put different prices on the different babies. So if there's a glut in one baby market, we'll lower the prices. And if there is an excess in another, we'll raise the prices, right? Now, for an economist, that's a natural way of approaching a problem, right? If you have a supply and demand issue, you're going to think about making a market for it, and you will. But of course, this horrified many of the social scientists and legal scholars who have a more sort of social science and humanities background. That he just sort of so I've heard this idea described as infamous. It's an infamous idea, right? And it is like I say, he's still a very successful legal scholar, also a very respected judge, but probably will not be nominated for the Supreme Court because this sort of thing just won't do, right? This is not something you just say. And it does create certain issues in transdisciplinary attempts to interact, right? So if you're going to be working with sociologists, maybe not bring your absolutely most coldly economic reasoning to that table, because it will be jarring, right? Does that make sense? Right. So keep that in mind, that there are certain things that we can say and they will affect our social status in our discipline. And that, of course, there can be radical versions of that. where you simply are no longer welcome in the discipline. Be deliberate about this. If you find that let's say you're going into a field that doesn't feel that anything can become a market, and you're the sort of person that thinks the only real way to think about things is as markets, and maybe you need to find a discipline where that kind of attitude is legitimate and isn't going to get you into moral difficulty, right? So that you can be yourself, so you can think the thoughts that you want to think. So do keep that in mind as you are learning to talk in your discipline. Is this a discipline where I like to talk, right? Or is this a discipline where I feel like I have to keep half of myself kind of under wraps? And there's a lot of choices to make out there. So don't just think there is only one way to be a good person. You can just find your community, right, and be a good person in that community. And of course, the reason I say that is that these days there's a lot of talk in the very, very sort of at the most high public kind of level with this, I don't know if you've probably heard that the wealthiest man in the universe has taken over the most influential social media platform, Twitter, now owns it privately, and is trying to do some things with it. It's trying to turn it into a public square for conversation. And of course, the thing that inspired him, if you will, or motivated him to make a move there was that he felt that people were not, had not been given a place to speak their mind, right? That not enough people could say what they wanted to say, right? And so he wants to, if we take him at face value, I know some people don't, but if we take him, he wants to do something about that. Right? So he wants to create a space where people can speak. But of course, that's going to mean he's going to create a space where people can also show each other that they're willing to say things that are not okay to say, right? And so people will find ways of building communities in that situation. So please do that. Do remember that it can affect not only your enjoyment of your peer group at school, so the sort of the value that people attribute to you when they're talking to you. Depending on how publicly you make your statements, it can affect your future career path, right? So keep that in mind as well. I try not to come up with examples because I know I can only get in trouble if I come up with what would be an example of something that wouldn't be okay to say, Thomas, right? So I try to stay away from that. But I can tell you this anecdote, which I thought is, which really gave me a lot of pause, like, because I can kind of feel already in this room that there's different kind of moods about this issue, right? It brings up different emotions in people. And I went to China many years ago, just before the COVID issue arose. So I went to China, and we have a joint program there that we run with joint European and Chinese students. And it presented this problem, of political correctness, we call it, right? And I sort of noticed that the entire room understood what I was talking about, right? That there is such a thing as saying the wrong thing, and it can get you into trouble. But half the room was thinking about one kind of thing, and the other half of the room was thinking about another kind of thing, right? Another way of getting in trouble for saying the wrong thing. So I think it's very, very contextual, and it very much depends on your discipline. But learn to handle it. It sounds like a warning. I've told this story before, but I'm going to tell it again because I think it's such a great story. It sounds like a warning, and I'm trying to make you scared, but I'm definitely not trying to make you scared. I'm just trying to point out that there is a problem. And the best way to think about it is using Astrid Lindgren's character, Anya Røverdætter, Anya the robber's daughter, who reaches a certain age. She lives in the Middle Ages, in the middle of a forest, in a castle with her gang of thieves. They're good guys, but they're a gang of thieves. And they live in this castle. And she reaches a certain age and she's allowed to go out and explore the forest for herself. And her father loves her very much and is very concerned for her welfare. So he says, you must be very careful down by the river. You must be very careful by the abyss of doom. Because it's a scary place as well. And what does she take from this? Does she stay well away from the river? Does she stay well away from the abyss of doom? No, no. She goes right down to the edge of the river and is very careful there. She goes right up to the abyss of doom, jumps over it, back again, very carefully, because her father said, be careful. Right? She said, how can I be careful if I don't go right there and be careful? Right? I have to go there and do it. She took the warning, there's a danger in the world, and turned it into something quite different than a stay away from it. She said, I'm going to have to seek it out and figure out how to deal with this danger, because that will make me strong. That's what I encourage you to do. All right? So I encourage you to understand that there is rhetorical difficulty. There are difficult conversations. There are topics that are hard to deal with. And I encourage you to recognize them, take them seriously, respect the people who have different views about these issues, right? And address them with compassion and empathy, right? But be brave, right? Be brave in your attempts to express yourself. If these are your justified true beliefs, right? If you have made up your mind, if you have an opinion to share and you think it is relevant, part of your skill set is going to be learning how to talk about these things. And going forward, like I say, especially if Elon gets his way, going forward, this is going to be a skill you want to have. Right? You don't just want to be a person that calls questions stupid. You don't just want to be a person that says that's not a very funny joke. And you don't just want to be a person that takes offense or just causes offense blindly. Right? So one of the ways I like to say this is, if you're going to offend your audience, do it deliberately. Right? Do it with intention, because what will happen is you will say something, you know it's going to affect your audience in a certain way, and you have a plan for how you're going to get through the next 5 or 10 minutes of that conversation so that you get something productive out of it. Sort of as the worst case scenario, I like to say, if you're really good at this, the worst thing that can happen is that you end up losing a friend, but keeping them as a peer, right? So you're still in the same community, but you've discovered you no longer like each other. Right? And that's okay. Right? It's okay that you learn something true about each other. From an academic point of view, the only thing that's important is that you can still talk about knowledge. You can still share knowledge. You can still talk about ideas. Right? These three things that I've mentioned are, of course, not an exhaustive list of what goes into being a conversant person, a good speaker, a knowledgeable speaker. But I like them as kind of indicators of the kinds of problems that we can deal with, that we can run into. Keep in mind that they count both for a talk like this and for a conversation that you might be in, if you engage in any kind of conversation back and forth. And then keep in mind that what you're trying to do is practice. So if I say be brave, please also take the other side of it. Be kind to each other. Say be charitable in your interpretations of each other's utterances. Right? Give each other time to try things out. Give each other time to ask questions. Give each other time to tell jokes. Give each other time to broach difficult subjects. Right? Learn how to do it. Help each other figure out how to do it, because that's really part of your, it's an important part of your skill set. And then to loop back, and then I'll finish, then we can take a break and take some questions. Make sure that your experiments in speaking are bounded in time. Right? So don't think you have to always be good at speaking, but as you go forward, you've got these little opportunities to practice, for, like you've got an oral exam, probably in some of your courses, you'll have to defend something orally. You're training for that. You're practicing to deal with that very, very particular situation, those 15 or 20 minutes where you're going to be sitting in front of some serious people. What was it? A friend of mine said when I was defending my PhD, he sent me a nice message. He said, I hear you're going to be talking trash with some influential people today. So those situations will come up for you, right? Where you are actually in a situation like that. The good thing to do, though, is to practice on each other. So you're talking to other knowledgeable people at the same level. And then when you sit in front of your examiners, to try to look them in the eye at the same level. That's what they're trying to figure out. They're not trying to figure out, can you talk to a professor? They're trying to figure out, can you talk to other people at your level, right? Are you conversant at the level you need to be in this subject matter? So always, at university, keep that in mind. The other people you're talking to, the other people in the conversation, are your intellectual equals. You respect them. You find them interesting, right? You think they're qualified to tell you if you're wrong. That's a good one to keep in mind, right? These are people who are qualified to tell you that you're wrong. And just like a piece of, usually I say this about a piece of writing, but you can definitely also do this about a talk or your contribution to a conversation. Your job in making these contributions is to make the other people more interesting. So when you write something and you show that to somebody, your writing should make your reader more interesting to you for a few minutes. If you're in a conversation, it's not you that's supposed to be interesting, right? Your contribution is supposed to make them more interesting to you. Right? So the conversation becomes more interesting to you because you give them an opportunity to do these various things. Right? That's a really good test of your knowledge makes other people more interesting. Christopher Hitchens used to say that he liked to drink because it made other people more interesting. I don't recommend that strategy. Be knowledgeable because that makes other people more interesting, right? Well, on that note, since it's also getting late, we'll take off like a 5-minute break. I'll turn off the recording and then we'll have a chat if you have some questions. I'll try to give you whatever tips I have. Obviously, this is my personal statement and you can just take from it what you will, right? See you. See you in a moment. 5 minutes.